There's a structural problem inside most professional services firms that almost nobody has given a name to. Not because it's hard to see. Once you know what to look for, it shows up everywhere, right? But because the frameworks built to measure business health were never designed to catch it. Revenue tracking, KPIs, conversion optimization. None of that is designed to look at the gap between what the firm says it is and what it actually delivers. I built BVEA to surface exactly this kind of fragility. And the most consistent thing BVEA finds across firm size, market, practice area is what I have been calling the two-firm problem. Every professional services firm exists in two places at the same time. There is the firm on the website, the positioning, the story, the wins highlighted, the values put in bold, the kind of firm it says it is. And there is the firm that clients actually experience. What happens after they sign? What communication looks like when they have a question and it's almost about 11 p.m. How they describe the whole thing when someone they trust asks how it went. Those two versions of the firm almost never the same. And the gap between them is not a messaging problem, not a branding problem. It is a structural fragility. It sits between what the brand promises and what the client actually experiences, right? One of the realizations I have seen founders arrive at when this process is done, and it almost always catches them off guard, is that their brand was never what they thought it was. It was not the logo, not the website, not the positioning statement on the homepage. The brand was what clients experienced after they signed. How they felt when they called and no one called back. What they told the next person who asked how it went. The whole unique story deeply rooted in their mind and the meaning attached to that story about why they have to trust you, why they have to say yes to you and no to others, right? How they feel about themselves after they signed. That is what the brand actually is. Everything else is what the firm hopes the brand is. And the gap between those two things, that is the two-firm problem in a plain language, okay? Now, let me be clear about what I'm not saying here, which is very important. The two-firm problem is not about dishonesty. Not about founders deceiving anyone. That is a different problem and a much simpler one, okay? What BVEA identifies is a structural drift. The website gets updated when someone pays for a redesign, right? When the firm wins a big case, when the messaging starts to feel stale, right? Brand updates are event-driven. They happen in bursts. But the actual experience of being a client, that changes every day, right? Every intake call, every case file, every staff interaction, every phone calls that doesn't get returned, right? And nobody's holding those two things next to each other. So the brand becomes what the firm intends to be, and the operation reveals what the firm actually is. The distance between those two things is the two-firm problem, and it compounds quietly until someone from the outside look at both at the same time. Here is where this stops being a brand observation and becomes a valuation problem. Think about who is looking at your firm from the outside, not just potential client. Think about maybe a potential acquirer doing quiet research, right, before making a call. For example, a strategic partner deciding whether they want their name next to yours, right? A referral source, for example, an attorney at another firm deciding whether to stake their own reputation on sending you a client they have spent years building trust with, right? Every one of those people follows the same pattern before they ever call you. They go to the website, for sure. They form an expectation to learn about your business, your products, what is it all about? And then, and this is the part most founders have never really thought about, okay? They read the reviews, not a few, all of them, in order, oldest to newest, not looking for the good ones, right? They're looking for the pattern. And then they compare what the brand says to what the pattern reveals. If those two stories describe the same firm, that is rare, honestly. And that rarity is worth something real. That kind of trust cannot be manufactured quickly, right? But if those two stories describe different firms, then they apply discount. Not because they are cynical, because they are logical. When the brand says one thing and the client record describes another, anyone doing real research, right, prices the operation and discount the brand, okay? That is not a marketing or reputation problem. That is a valuation problem. BVEA was built to catch exactly this gap. And here is what it consistently finds when it maps a firm across three sources layers, right? The brand, the full client review record, and the public record, okay? It finds something the firm's own leadership has never seen. Not because the information was hidden, because no one had ever placed all three next to each other and looked for the gap at the same time. The website tells you how the firm sees itself, right? The client records read in full, in chronological order. Every single review tells you how clients actually experience it. And now, the public record tells you what is on file. And when you place all three next to each other, a pattern appears. One complaint is noise. One difficult client, one bad quarter, one staff member who has since left, right? But the same complaint from three different clients across 3 different years, right? Written independently of each other, that is a structural signal. That is not a people problem. That is the architecture problem. And the difference between calling it one versus other is a difference between apologizing for it forever and actually designing it out of the firm. Here is something I've seen consistently, and it is what makes these fragilities so hard to address, right? The founders who are closest to the brand, the ones who built it, who lived through every win and every hard period, are almost always the last ones to see the gap. Not because they are not paying attention, because they are paying attention to the wrong layer, right? They see what they intended, right? They don't see what clients actually experience, right? And the distance between those two things, that is exactly where the structural problem lives. Nobody inside the firm is positioned to see it, because seeing it requires standing where a stranger stands. BVEA was built to generate exactly that view, because it is a view the firm cannot produce about itself. The two-firm problem shows up in a few different forms, right? And depending on which one you are dealing with, where you would point the fix is completely different. Okay? The most common is founder dependency. The brand position a team. The operation runs through one person. Okay? Clients do not actually experience the firm. They experience the founder. And when the founder is in trial, for example, or traveling, or just stretched thin, the experience degrades. The brand keeps promising what the operation can no longer consistently deliver, right? The second form is what I call the intake drop-off. The brand becomes what the firm intends to be. The operation reveals what the firm actually is before the returner is signed. The firm is attentive, right? Fast, present, genuinely engaged. After, the quality of attention shifts. The one usually traces back to how the firm's incentives are built, what the business model rewards and what it quietly stops rewarding once the money is in, right? And then there is the positioning gap. The brand is claiming depth or scale that the operation has not actually built yet, right? Or, and this is the one most founders find surprising, the reverse. The firm has built something real, a genuine track record, real depth in a specific area that took years to develop, and the brand has just never surfaced it. That firm is harder to replace than the market knows. But what cannot be seen cannot be protected. And what cannot be protected cannot be valued, right? The fragility runs in both directions, right? So here's a question I want to leave you with, and I want you to think about it. If a stranger, it could be an acquirer, whatever, right? Someone who has never met you, never been referred to you, has never heard your name, went to your website right now and then read your last 40 reviews. In order, with no other context, right? They check everything about you, right? Would they think they were looking at the same firm? That question is worth sitting with. And I really appreciate you if you think about it and answer it to yourself. Okay? Thank you.